The speaker for the evening is John McCarthy. I came to Northport about 4 to 5 years ago, and at times would attend commission meetings either at the county or the city. And when John McCarthy made presentations, I was always very impressed. Very thorough, very knowledgeable. Well, he is now, he's retired from Sarasota County, and he formed a foundation which helps advise. Why don't I leave it for you to say? So, John McCarthy.
Larry's giving me too much credit. But when I did leave Sarasota County government after 33 years, I went to work for an organization called SCOPE, Sarasota County Openly Plans for Excellence. And SCOPE was formed in about 2000 to get to the bottom of what's going on in our community with education and environment and economy. And so we do measurement of all those things, and we also help to get people together and talk about what's important to them in the community. But tonight I'm not here to talk about SCOPE. Tonight I'm here to talk about a little bit about my experience with Little Salt, I think, just to kind of set the tone for why you would ask me to come and speak to your meeting. And also some ideas that I have that I'm kind of floating around and sharing with people as I speak often. And it's amazing how many people ask me to speak about topics related to our communities or the heritage of our communities. And so it's certainly my privilege to be here tonight. And I want to start by telling you a little bit about how I got involved in the community in Sarasota. And I was actually born in Fort Myers, Florida. Grew up in Florida that I don't think exists anymore. I grew up on Fort Myers Beach, a place where every day I went to the beach, probably from the time I was about a week old. My mom took me to the beach. It was kind of on one side of the house, and on the other side of the house was what we called the back bay, what they call Estero Bay, mangrove-lined, Indian mounds everywhere. In fact, one of the largest Indian mounds on the southwest coast of Florida, Mound Key, one of the areas thought to be one of the capitals of the Calusa Indians, was within sight of my aunt's house. It was inside of my aunt's house, and we would leave my aunt's house in a canoe, and we would go out toward Mound Key, and then you couldn't see Mound Key, because once you got close to it, all you saw was the mangrove fringe, and you didn't know which one was Mound Key after that. So you had to kind of get your bearings early on in the trip, and then have confidence in yourself that you were still heading in the right direction. One day with one of my younger brothers, we lost that confidence, and we ended up quite far away from where we intended to go. We never made it to Mound Key that day, but we did make it home. I don't know how. But in the evening, my folks would take me out into the back bay, and we would look, and we would see literally 100 roseate spoonbills all out in the shallow waters. And I say it was different then, because today if I see one roseate spoonbill when I'm out kayaking in Sarasota, it's like a big deal. And yet I remember what things were like when I was 3, 4, and 5 years old. I think that my interest in history was started one day when I was told that my next door neighbor, Sonny Glover, was going to take my brother and I out to Mound Key for the first time. And I had heard all these stories about Mound Key, and I had an image in my mind of what it must have been like. And I wanted to go there very, very badly. And I think I was about 3 years old. And something happened that day. My mother decided that I was not going to get to go. Only my older brother, Patrick, would go. And so he went with Sonny, and they went to Mound Key, and I remember having a temper tantrum and crying quite a bit over this, and my mom said, "You're going to take a nap." And I didn't take a nap that day. And I think that that deprivation that occurred when I was about 3, of not being able to go to Mound Key, is what caused me to become fascinated with the heritage of where we live. And when my folks uprooted us, traumatically I would say, and moved us to Sarasota when I was about 7 years old, I kind of lost touch with nature and with kind of the roots of Florida, because I was no longer living in paradise. I was living in a downtown area. I grew up right next to Sarasota High School, and the only nature there was kind of a drainage ditch that we spent a lot of time in, but it wasn't like that big expanse of Estero Bay where we'd make my mom nervous every time we went canoeing because she didn't think we'd ever make it back, but we always did. So when I was in high school, I rode my bicycle everywhere, and I became fascinated with some of the places that I discovered. And I would ride my bike on Indian mounds that are no longer there. And I would see all these street names, named for people, and I wondered who they were. And I found myself gravitating back toward one of my high school teachers, Solomon Malinsky, and said, hey, how can I find out more about the history of this place? And he sent me to talk to a guy named Bud Davis, who was at the county. Bud was in charge of the Water and Navigation Control Authority. They did all the permits for dredging and seawalls and docks and all those sorts of things. And I go to Bud, and Bud says, I don't know why he sent you here. You need to go see my wife, Dottie, over at the History Center. So off on my bicycle I go over to the History Center, which at that time was up on the North Trail in Sarasota. And when I walked in the door, it was kind of an intimidating place. It used to be the old library, and I remember it being the old library, and the librarians in the old library were quite intimidating, and I remember being in there as a child and being intimidated, so here I was again as a high school student, somewhat intimidated. I went in there and told Dottie that her husband had sent me to see her, and she said, well, you know, what are you curious about? And I told her, and she put me to work. So I started doing a little volunteer work, and then one day she said, you know, I have this job opening, and you can go and apply for it. And I did. And so I became kind of a clerk. And my assignment was to go into all the old files of all the old newspapers and old letters and old photographs and copy them on a copy machine so that we could preserve them and people wouldn't have to handle the originals. We had a copy machine that, of course, was quite different than the ones we have today. You copied one sheet at a time, black and white only, and quite frankly, the reproduction of what you were making wasn't that hot. But she gave me all these files to copy, and so I had this opportunity to read studies by Carl Clausen, who was diving in these local springs, and then the rebuttals by William Royal to what Clausen was saying about the springs, and then I think Sonny Cockrell's rebuttal to Royal's rebuttal of Clausen's document, and then all these things like a paleobotany study of pollen in warm mineral springs, and a study of useful plants in warm mineral springs, and all these different reports that were all about a 1/4 inch thick, and it would take you quite a while to copy them on the copy machine. So while I was copying one page, I was reading the next. Copy the page, read the next, copy the page, read the next. And at the time when the copy machine was copying the stuff there, my brain was copying the other stuff up here, just kind of filing it away. I ended up in 2 years. Well, anyway, so Dottie was who first introduced me to Warm Mineral Springs, Little Salt Spring, Northport, and this idea that there are these submerged archaeological resources that were so unique and rare. And I was telling Steve earlier, I have a National Geographic magazine that has an image very similar to the one that you see in this art, talking about what was at the time considered the oldest evidence in North America of early man living in conjunction with Pleistocene mammals, like those giant tortoises and the ground sloths and some of these other things. And so that to me was fascinating. And one of the things that Dottie shared with me, and she didn't want me to read too much into this, but what she did tell me one thing, and I'll share it with the group because she's not around to share it anymore. But she said that way back in the history of Florida's native Indians, and this is really a stretch, so like I say, don't think too much of it, that there was this legend that early peoples had come to Florida actually underground, through like a cave system, and that they had come out here and kind of sprung out here in Florida. So I was fascinated by that. I thought that was a pretty cool thing, and of course, it's probably not true. But it didn't keep me from being somewhat fascinated by that notion that if sea level were low enough, that maybe these underground tunnels could be passageways and people could move around and then pop up to colonize new areas. I met Dottie in 1979, the year I graduated from high school, and by November 21st of 1979, I was working for her. It was a pretty good gig. I worked on the 21st of November, and then I got the 22nd and the 23rd off. It was Thanksgiving weekend. I thought this was a pretty good deal. Working for government, get paid for, work one day, get paid for 3, so I stayed. And Dottie retired in 1981, and the county administrator at the time, Ed Maroney, asked me if I would become the county historian. I was 19 years old. I grew a big beard, bigger than Bill's. And I did everything possible to make myself look older. And I can tell you the story of how that came to be, but I don't want to waste your time with that tonight because I got a lot of other things I want to share. But it wasn't long after Dottie retired that I got a call from Sonny Cockrell, and he was working down at War Mineral. And it was at that point that I had a chance to kind of really understand kind of the reality of what was going on, and it kind of went from being a 1/4-inch thick document to being a place, a real place that existed. And I'll never forget the first time I went there. I don't know what I was thinking, but I wasn't thinking I was going to see this inverted cone of St. Augustine grass with 400 anodized gold aluminum Chase lounge chairs. And yet that's what I saw. And it was at that point that I actually met Sonny's wife, Barbara, and Skip Wood, who was a sheriff's deputy here in Sarasota, and I think is either still associated with the sheriff's office or maybe he's retired, and Steve Koski. And that was probably 83, 84, Steve, somewhere in there.
85, 86.
85, 86. So again, pretty early on in my career, I had that opportunity. And then what I've found over the years, and by the way, this is just the introduction to my presentation. This is the presentation itself. This is just kind of prepping you for it. So you understand why I was even asked to come here tonight, you know. The next time that I think my paths crossed firmly with Little Salt was at a county commission meeting at the South County Courthouse, the Robert Anderson Center, and John Hurley, who was the county's real property officer, who would buy all the land from the county, kind of sidles up to me and says, "John, I got a problem and I think you can help." I said, "What's that?" He says, "I'm getting ready to go up in front of the Board of County Commissioners and exchange some of the as cheated lots that we have for unpaid taxes with some of these lots of a midden over by the Little Salt Spring Slough," and he'd been working with Steve Koski to assemble these lots so that we could exchange the lots and preserve them. And he said, "But here's my problem. When the commissioners ask me who's going to manage this stuff, I got nothing to tell them." Because you see, John didn't really work for a department in the county. He worked for administration. He was just the guy that bought the property. So he said, "Will Parks take care of it?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So when he went up to present this to the board, what he told them was, "We've got it all worked out. Parks will take care of this." Of course, I had to have a handshake deal with Steve. "Hey, listen, when Parks is responsible for this, will you help us take care of it?" And of course, it was Steve and others down here in the community who were driving this whole idea of buying these platted lots that comprised a midden component, which was remarkable to me, that here there was, we've got this totally ancient stuff down underwater, and now we've got a midden type of thing, which is what I was most familiar with, like over on the coastal areas of Sarasota. And then I learned about this burial slough, where this natural slough, again with a anaerobic situation in place where the bodies that were laid down were largely preserved over time. And this kind of runs up between the midden and the high school there, north of the Little Salt Spring site. And I began to see that it wasn't just about what was under the water, but what was in the slough and what was in the midden, and how all of this began to fit together. And then I would listen to everything that Steve told me, and I would try to remember it. So that's kind of taking you up to like 2003. We then engaged in a little planning process for the midden. I had a park planner working for me, Bill Wisniewski. He got involved in that, worked with Steve and a number of other people, perhaps a few of you in the room. And then, Steve, you remember you were doing the underground radar there at the slough.
That was the sub-bottom profile that Dr. Gifford brought.
There you go.
One of his.
There you go.
Yep.
So the idea was, what if we use this subterranean radar sonar thing to try to kind of see where the people are down there? And I was asked to mow the grass first. You know, sometimes it's the simple things that make science occur. Mowing the grass was a prerequisite to being able to do this thing. And then, kind of coming up through time, I believe I attended the charter meeting of this group when folks in the community began to kind of think that we had the War Mineral Little Salt Archaeological Society, but maybe we need a group focused directly on Little Salt. And Terry Redmond had helped establish this Friends of County Parks, kind of setting the tone for these friends groups so that people could be engaged in what was going on in our park system, whether it was Arlington Park or Siesta Key or wherever it might be. And so, you know, I saw this group get started, and a lot of people down here with an interest in what was going on in their communities. After that, I remember a lot of meetings with Steve and Dr. Gifford and Marty Ardren, and a lot of phone calls with Tracy Ardren, all about the fate of the spring, what's the University of Miami thinking, what are they doing, what's going to happen, where are we going? And I was kind of tuned into all that stuff at the time. And then I had the opportunity to be a part of the acquisition of Warm Mineral Spring by both the city of Northport and the county of Sarasota. And buying it was easier than managing it. And then more recently, of course, there's been discussion about Little Salt, which is owned by the University of Miami, and how that may transfer to another owner. And so there's been a lot of talk about that, and that kind of brings us up to kind of the current day. And then the last thing that I'll mention as part of my self-introduction is that about a year ago, Bill reached out to me and invited me to moderate a panel discussion about Warm Mineral, Little Salt, and the archaeological treasures here under the auspices of the Ancient Waters Foundation. And I have to tell you that moderating a group of 10 scientists, many of which had never been in a room together before, was probably one of the crowning achievements of my entire professional career. And I think that it was awesome. And I said it that day, and I'll say it again, you know, never before had we brought together such a wide range of talent and knowledge about these resources to have an open conversation, and we did. And what do we have, about 150, 175 people that joined us that day. And that was a really, really good day. And that brings us to tonight, when Laurie reached out to me several months ago and said, John, can you come and can speak to our group? And of course the answer was yes. So that's who I am. I think I'm here because now it's been almost 35 years since Dottie handed me those reports to copy. And in 35 years, I've had an opportunity to meet people throughout the county. I've had an opportunity to get to know Inglewood and Northport and the city of Venice and Osprey and Nokomis and Fruitville and Bee Ridge and Old Nyaca and stretch out beyond and get to understand Boca Grande and Cortez and all these other special places. And one of the things that I'm fascinated with is how many special places there are in Sarasota County and in our community. And I think my goal in life for the rest of my life now, what I'll apply the next 3 decades to, is how do we ensure that we don't become anywhere USA? And how do we become that someplace special USA? And so I've been out lecturing on this. And I've been to Venice. And I've been to Boca Grande. And I've been to downtown Sarasota. And I'll be going up to Cortez soon. Sharing with people this thing that I see, which is that understanding our heritage and applying it toward our future is an awesome thing to do from an educational standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and just from a right thing to do standpoint. It's a sense of place. It's our identity as a community. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So I want to give a name to my presentation tonight because I don't know that my presentation as yet has a title. So the title will be Little Spring, Big Bang. Did you know that the concept of the universe starting with this Big Bang was first conceived in 1927? Did you know that? By a Catholic priest who was looking for a way to explain the biblical creation and combine science and spirituality with this idea that one atom created it all through this thing that he called the creation theory. He didn't call it the Big Bang. He called it the creation theory. And his name was La Maitre, like maitre d', La Maitre. And so it was also called the La Maitre theory. And it really first came to the attention of the public in 1931, when the New York Times first published this notion of what this priest had come up with. And by the way, he was an astronomer, so he was kind of again, the science on the one side and the spirituality on the other coming together. And then in 1947, a British astronomer named Fred Hyde said that he was nuts. There was no way that this started as a Big Bang. It was there, it had always been there, that the universe was a static thing, and he was actually who coined the term Big Bang as a derogatory statement that he hoped would squelch La Maitre's theory. Instead, those who supported the notion of this wonderful creation took on the name Big Bang, and it stuck. And most scientists today believe in the Big Bang. They think it happened 4.6 billion years ago. And why am I talking about the Big Bang? Well, I was talking to somebody the other day, and they thought that the reason why we sent this rocket ship up to land on this comet was to understand the earliest origins of the universe. Wow, if it were only that easy. But that's not why the comet was sent. I mean, not why the rocket was sent to the comet. The rocket was sent to the comet to understand the origins of our solar system. Because comets were formed when our solar system was formed. And they're running around out there in the Kuiper Belt, and they're running by us every now and then. And those comets are as old as the solar system. So they're thinking, if we can learn more from these comets, we can learn more about this world in which we live. Every once in a while, science does something really, really cool. And I gotta tell you, I grew up with the space program, you know. I watched every Gemini launch that occurred while I was a youngster. I watched every Apollo. I'll never forget the day that Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, because I was watching TV inside and my older brother Pat was outside with his astronaut helmet on and his American flag, and I was telling him what was going on the TV set so he could plant the flag on the surface of the moon in kind of the dirt that was our lawn in the front yard from us playing with all our Tonka trucks. And we had our own moon landing right there at 850 South School Avenue, right in downtown Sarasota. But every once in a while, science does something really, really cool. And to me, this really, really cool thing is that we're able to send this probe up and land on this comet, right? And everybody's talking about it. Did you know that on Twitter that the comet is trending like 3 times the nude photos of Kim Kardashian? Okay, that were just released like at the same time. People are finding this more interesting. So, you know, we had the shuttle program, and then that kind of went down, and now this, out of nowhere, we sent this rocket ship up 10 years ago, right? And so let's talk a little bit about this journey and what this is all about. So why was the orbiter called Rosetta? What's the Rosetta Stone, right? This was a stone with Greek and Egyptian symbols, and helped archaeologists begin to understand Egyptian hieroglyphics. And if there's anyone in the room that knows how to actually pronounce the name of the landing craft correctly, I believe it's Fahili. And Fahili, the name of the landing craft, and I might not be pronouncing it correctly, is a place in Egypt. It is now a submerged archaeological site. It was flooded by the construction of the Aswan Dam. It's completely underwater now. And there they found an obelisk, which also had Greek and Egyptian symbols on it. And it was actually that, which you never hear about, which was the final clicks that allowed the deciphering of the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So it was the Rosetta Stone, and then the Fahili obelisk. And so you have an orbiter called Rosetta, and you have a lander called Fahili, and they're all about understanding, right? Understanding a language, understanding the comet, understanding what's going on. So what I think is interesting is that this rocket ship was launched 10 years ago. It represents a long-term investment and determination necessary to keep this thing going, because what if they had stopped the program while the thing was going out there and they didn't maintain it? Then it would all be for waste, right? But if you Google this, try to find when the idea actually started. It's not that easy. They'll all tell you the rocket ship launched in 2004. Well, that isn't when it got started. This idea of sending a probe to the comet started in the 1980s. The same time that Steve was working with Sonny Cockrell and Skip Wood in War Mineral Springs, they were talking about sending this thing up. And in 1993, they finally got approval from the European Space Agency to do it. Now, it wasn't all done by the European Space Agency. This thing is a partnership between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the private sector, and then other agencies. So it's a huge partnership that allowed this to occur. It took 2,000 people to land that lander on that comet. It cost 1.4 billion euros to land that lander on the comet. And that rocket ship had to fly 317 million miles to reach its target, which is a target that's 4 kilometers across, 2.5 miles across, that's moving at 84,000 miles an hour. Now you think about that as a goal. We want to land this thing on this comet, and it's moving 84,000 miles an hour, and it's 317 million miles away. To what end? So we sent up this technology that's now 10 years old to study the chemical makeup of the gas and the dust of this comet, this ice cube floating around out there. And oh, by the way, today's Google is, they've confirmed carbon, the essence of life on the comet. It's one of the things that's already been sent back to Earth. Temperature and conductivity of the comet, the interior makeup of the comet via this underground radar device that John Gifford loaned them. The interaction between gas and the dust that's on the surface, because that's what kind of shows the comet tail when it's going to fly by the sun. All that stuff's going to start showing. And then how it interacts with the solar wind. And then, using a mass spectrometer, the organic compounds that they expect to find there, the nucleus of life. And when I looked at that list, it seemed incredibly similar to me to some of the things that I've heard come out of Steve's mouth and other scientists' mouths about studying these local springs. What's the temperature? What's the composition of the water? What's the interaction with the oxygen in the water below the surface? What allows the material to stay preserved? What are the algae that exist here versus there? Why are the fish up here and then down here? And so all these things that we're trying to figure out about this thing that's millions of miles away, we're kind of trying to do the exact same thing, instead of launching up by diving down. Now this thing has a battery that could only last so long. And unfortunately, the way it bounced twice, the solar panels aren't generating a whole lot of electricity. But within just a few days, it had gathered all of the information that it was really set to gather. And all that stuff's streaming back to us now. It takes a long time to get back to Earth. I'm fascinated by this. Now, I'm listening to the radio the other day, and it's a talk show kind of thing, and a guy calls up, he says, this is such a waste of time and money. This whole space thing is such a waste of time and money, and he's kind of hammering that. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I wonder if maybe my generation, born in '61, born during the space program. I wonder how many people remember that prior to the space shuttle, or Skylab, I'll say, a pocket calculator cost, does anyone remember? $99, Texas Instruments, one company, one calculator, $99, that was that. Within how many years you could buy a pocket calculator at every drugstore in the country for 99 cents? I mean, cell phones, solar technology, it all started in the space program. And so the things that, in fact, that little probe sitting up on that comet right now has the most advanced solar system that was known to man when it was launched 10 years ago, and it still kind of far outshines anything that we have going on right now. So when we look at what science can sometimes do, or scientific discoveries, it's a huge economic boom because it spins off in so many directions and it pumps information in so many ways. And of course, if you open up the economics book, Economics 101, the cornerstone of economics is education and innovation and creativity. And so projects like sending this washing machine with legs to this comet to study it have far-reaching impacts for us. Was it a cost of 1.4 billion euros, or was it an investment of 1.4 billion euros that is going to come back to us many-fold as we really begin to understand more about what's out there? Anybody figure out what any of this has to do with Little Salt yet?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I see this huge parallel between the Rosetta mission and what's going on down here. So the Rosetta mission, if you look at it kind of on a global level, it is we as Earthlings, as a people, kind of getting together in this global partnership, seeking answers to the origin of the very place in which we live, our sun's solar system. And which helps us to understand our place in the whole universe. And so that program launched upward. Our program launches downward. But it's the same thing. It's all kinds of people in a partnership to gain a better understanding of this place we call Northport, and this place we call Sarasota, and this place we call Florida, which, by the way, is the most recognized geography on the planet. You can ask someone anywhere on the planet to identify where Florida is. More people know where Florida is than any other place in the world. So here at Little Salt, we have a regional partnership too. We have you. We have University of Miami. We've got City of Northport, Sarasota County, University of, Penn State, Florida Aquarium. And Steve could probably list numerous other entities that have been a part of this partnership to learn everything that we can about our origins, but maybe also to learn something about our future. So where do we go from here? Well, here's something that I've kind of learned in life, and I've learned it time and time again, and that is good things take time. So launching a probe to land on a comet started in the 80s, approved in 93, launched 2004, landed November of 2014. Little Salt Spring research, Dr. Gifford was down there in the 1980s. And then other things occur, and other things occur, and other things occur. Sometimes it's kind of slowly. But I think that what we have to do is we have to be prepared for opportunities as they come up. So while things take time, then there's also that old cliche of you got to strike while the iron's hot, right? Well, I learned this lesson once I was in my office one day. A gentleman came into my office 24 hours early. Had an appointment with him the following day. And he said, "John, I see that piece of property you have there on Bee Ridge Road and Honore Avenue, and I want to see that become a park." And I kind of, didn't really know what he was telling me. And he said, "I want to write you a check." So I said, "Well, we could put your name on the playground for like $30,000, $40,000. No, not interested. How about the picnic pavilion? No, not interested. He says, "I want to do the whole park." He says, "I got $1 million, I want to write you a check." He was ready to write it. He had his personal checkbook. He just sold a BMW dealership that he'd founded in Sarasota. He had to move some money. And I had to convince him that before we could do that, we had to kind of get the Board of County Commissioners' approval to name it after him, and we came up with this name, Urfer Family Park. Urfer Family Park has become a phenomenon in Sarasota. But here's what I wanted to tell you about it, because now you're wondering, John, where are you going, and what does that have to do with Little Salt Spring? We had all the permits in hand that we needed to build the park. We just didn't have the money. Had I not had all the permits and then the engineering and everything ready to go to build this thing, he would have given me this check, and it would have taken me 3 years to get the permits, and he would have become very dissatisfied. And at the age that he was, who knows, would he even see the park built? Instead, a miracle occurred. $1 million check comes in, permits are in hand, contractors hired. Next thing you know, park dedication, hundreds of kids, hundreds of families, every day, a phenomenon. And so I would say that we, the community, we need to be ready for what might come down the road. And you never know when these opportunities will come along. Sometimes it feels when we're on these missions that we've slowed down, or we've lost some ground, or we don't know what's going on at any one point in time. They had to turn off communication with Rosetta for a goodly portion of its journey out to the comet to conserve energy, because they really had to save for getting there. So there was like a 2.5-year dark period where we didn't really know what was going on with Rosetta. We hoped it was still going in the right direction. But then, again, almost a miracle, it came back to life when it was supposed to, ready to deploy the little probe, the washing machine with legs, to go down on the Common. As there's discussion about University of Miami perhaps divesting its ownership to another entity, a government entity, it may appear like we're in a sleeping mode. But remember, good things take time. When it comes to land acquisition, oftentimes the details must be addressed, and that adds time to the wait. But maybe they result in a better outcome in the end. So I almost feel like, in a sense, our orbiter's been launched. We've got scientific data and scientific studies that if you Google Little Salt, you can read all these studies of Dr. John Gifford and other colleagues that have written these reports with him. And we've got Friends of Little Salt Spring, we've got the War Mineral Little Salt Ecological Society, we have commissioners on both the City Commission and the County Commission that have an interest in these springs. We have a populace that has an interest, and I think we have a growing population in our nation that has an interest in science. What do we hear about now when it comes to education? STEM. Science, technology, engineering, and math. I was daydreaming through most of school, what can I tell you? But science is exceptionally important as a way to help children understand how to think about things, and how to research things, and how to do things. So there's a lot of emphasis on that today. And one of the things that I think we need to start doing is thinking not just that Little Salt is about our history or our heritage, but it's really about science in our future. It's really about, and I'll use this as an example. I feel like I can reach out and touch the comet because the photo's taken like it's taken with my iPhone. I feel like I can reach out and touch it. Anytime I want, I can go look at images online. I can study anything I want to study about this comet just by a few keystrokes. Do you think that there are children in classrooms around our country doing that? You betcha. Probably in a way more so with this particular episode than anything that's happened in the last 10 years or so. There's all of a sudden a kind of a rallying point, something that is taking the focus and saying, and so what I've read people say is that science is often so distant that people don't understand it and they feel disconnected to it. But when you can touch science, when you feel a part of it, then it's meaningful to you. And then you learn from it and you contribute to it. So I think we have an opportunity here as we talk about Little Salt, as we study Little Salt, as we rally to preserve and continue to do research at Little Salt, that we remind people every time, it's not just about our history and our heritage, it's about our science and our future. It's about how do we inspire young people. And oh, by the way, wouldn't it be nice if a site such as Little Salt Spring had a school nearby? Any school would do, an elementary school, maybe a middle school, maybe a high school. Wouldn't that be grand? If we had a resource like this, a resource that's been in Science Magazine and National Geographic and it's all over Google, this place called Little Salt Spring, wouldn't it be great if we had a school within distance that maybe some students could reach out and touch it? Wouldn't that be great? Well, think about this, folks. I mean, how many communities on the planet, how many cities like Northport can claim 2 and more of some of the most significant prehistoric sites in North America? How many cities can claim that? And it's not just War Mineral and Little Salt. It's the Burial Slough. It's the Midden. It's the Nona site. It's other things that maybe we haven't even discovered yet, like Deep Hole in the Myakka River. There's like 1,000 alligators guarding that hole. Bill Royal didn't dive in that hole that I'm aware of. I don't think Sonny Cockrell dove in it. Carl Clausen didn't. Steve says he has. You have? You've dove in Deep Hole. Well, so,
There were only 63 gators.
There were only 63 gators at the time. So, think about it, folks. The city of Northport is just astounding to me that you're surrounded by natural land that's kind of unique in Florida. It's like the northern Everglades, northern big cypress, you know, prairies and pine flatwoods and all that cool stuff. You got the wild and scenic Myakka River, because of the work of Senator Bob Johnson and a lot of other people years ago to get that designated on a wild and scenic river. I think Northport actually has annexed enough land that you actually kind of are right there at the confluence of a wild and scenic river and a scenic highway, the old Tamiami Trail, US 41. You got these two unbelievable archaeological assets. And yet, when a lot of people think of Northport, they think of a platted subdivision by general development that is anywhere USA, right? And yet it's almost the opposite. So I think that what our job is to remind people, we are not anywhere USA. We are someplace special USA. There is no other place like this. And how do we then optimize and leverage and strategize so that we can both preserve those features which are intrinsic to our past, our present, and our future, and at the same time grow an economy around it? In this morning's Herald Tribune, Virginia Haley, the president of the Visit Sarasota County, says that once again we've had the banner year for tourism for Sarasota. And yet she's very clear to say we can't rest on our laurels, because innovation is the key to keeping things moving forward. So innovation for Northport might mean, how do we galvanize people's perception of us to be the place where we really care about the future of Florida, we really care about the history of Florida, and we care about what's going on here right now. Boca Grande was named the tarpon fishing capital of the world, I think it was 1887. They still embrace the heritage of the old Gasparilla Inn, the old railroad corridor, now a trail, the old phosphate docks, the old lighthouses restored, by the way, manned by a friends group. And of course you still go tarpon fishing here, it's still the tarpon fishing capital of the world. City of Venice, Mediterranean revival architecture, Northern Italian, everything there is wrapped around their heritage and their history, and they're leveraging that to great advantage. In fact, if you looked at the Herald Tribune article about the Chalk Fest, the Sarasota Chalk Fest at Venice this year, you'll see a megalodon shark emerging from the pavement of that old landing strip out there on the old Army Air Corps base. And so the shark's teeth on the beach and the Chalk Fest, and people get it. Venice has embraced its heritage. And is Venice having a good economy there right now? You betcha. So, and they do some sporting events and other things that are great, but they really get it. You ever go to downtown Dearborn Street? You ever been to a more quaint little downtown? Well, Inglewood's trying to do the same thing. Leverage their connection to the bay, the natural resource, and their history of their little Dearborn Street to create a little economic upwelling down there. Cortez Fishing Village. Anybody ever been to Cortez? It's like going back in time. And yet Cortez one day will be like the jewel of Manatee County in terms of helping people understand the relationship of people and water and fisheries and nature and all those other things. And then look at downtown Brayton. My gosh, do you see what they're up to? They got a funky, cool old downtown with brick streets and old buildings and little cafes outside along the beautiful Manatee River with a park along the front and concerts going on and all kinds of things happening up there. It's Bradenton economy on the up and up. Oh, and I didn't mention the little artist district that they have. So you combine art, science, history, heritage, community down here, I think you got a good thing going. I got like a minute and a half to get back from the common. Baby boomers, right? They're the ones that are coming. They're the ones with the money. They're the ones looking to retire. They're the ones looking to move around. What are baby boomers interested in? The type of baby boomer that's attracted to Sarasota County is a well-educated, fairly well-off type of person that's interested in lifelong learning. And in fact, lifelong learning is what engages most of you. Your insatiable curiosity to understand what's going on around you in your community and how you can learn from that, how it can enrich your life. And so this aspect of using Little Salt as a lifelong learning poster child for Northport, along with all the other good things going on, I think is something that has a lot of potential. So when I think of Northport, I think of a community that on the surface looks like anywhere USA. And as long as you look out in the distance, you see all the green, all the environmental lands, all the natural resources that surround us, and the beautiful Myakka River. And when you look at the archaeological sites, you begin to see these treasures, these little treasure boxes, if you will, that have only revealed a very small portion of their gift. Dr. Gifford told me earlier today that maybe they've scratched the surface of 3 to 5% of what can be learned from this spring site. And so that offers tremendous opportunity. Bill, you introduced me to your daughter and earlier this evening, and she already has a fascination for everything that I'm talking about. She's already decided she wants to work in the History Center. She's already thinking about how she, working with others, is going to ensure that Northport is a place that's known not as anywhere USA, but someplace special USA. So that's the big bang I'm talking about, folks, when we all wake up and we realize that we actually have more assets here than most communities out there. And we leverage them all together to create an economy based on things that no one else has. There's no competition for it. And we preserve our quality of life, and we preserve our heritage. And for me, it's not really a question of if this is going to happen. To me, the big bang is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. But I think we need to start getting ready for it, because I think the stars are aligning in terms of a lot of good things that can occur. And I think the time is now, and I think we're going to see some things soon that are going to help us along this journey of reaching our little comet down at the bottom of that spring and understanding so much more about what makes life tick in Florida. So that's all I have to say tonight, and I haven't even left much room for Q&A. But Larry, that's what I'm thinking, folks.
There's a lot of fudge factor in our agenda tonight. So you don't have an opportunity like this that come by very often. So let's take as much time as you're interested for question and answers. Any questions or any comments?
How can we get ready?
I think you're doing it already. I think building the membership, engaging citizens, building the understanding. I can tell you that this piece of art alone blows me away in terms of, maybe for the first time for most people, shows what the spring looked like when the water level was lower because of sea level being so much lower. And so you begin to think about it differently. You begin to understand what we're talking about here. And so I think that's one way to get ready. I think the other way to get ready is to have some plans, to have some plans. And not small plans, but great plans. And great plans don't mean big things to build. Great plans mean well thought out plans about what are some of the strategies. How could we get a school to locate nearby, for instance? What kind of programs could be offered if we had a school nearby? Who are the other scientists out there? What are the other disciplines that could be studied in a place? When we had our symposium, the Ancient Waters Symposium, we heard about the studies that Mote Marine Lab has done in the Bahamas and these sinks and the algae that grow. And what if we started looking at the different algae and things like this that grow and better understand those things? And sometimes you don't understand, well, John, what's the practical application of that? Well, sometimes we don't always understand the practical application. But we're all talking on cell phones a lot to me like what they had there on the Star Trek, right?
Better.
In fact, we're beyond that now because they had the flip phone. And we've almost got the communicator and the tricorder all in one. So, it's kind of like what we've got, the smartphone, I think another way to get ready is to continue to educate. We have a city commissioner here tonight that's been reelected, but you have one new commissioner or two new commissioners? One new commissioner who is aware of Little Salt, but and we have two new commissioners on the county commission as of today. So we have to constantly bring our leaders, our elected leaders, into the fold so that they can understand why you are so passionate about this place and other places like this. But I think we have to create great plans. And I think that this organization is where a lot of that can start. And whether you're studying the water, the mixture of the oxygen in the water, the algae in it, the other fauna, the early flora that supported mankind, the changes in the water level and what that meant. There's a lot of opportunity out there. And of course, years ago, I remember seeing renderings. I think Dr. John had those done by some folks at the University of Miami, architecture students, of what about a welcome center? You know? What about a place where people can go and learn? And not just heritage, but nature. What, there's 100 acres there at the site?
112.
112. 112 acres of nature, of natural Florida. You don't have a lot of unadulterated natural Florida in Northport. Most of it's all second growth pines. As much as you love them, you know, everything was pretty much plowed under when GDC came through, except certain little pockets and pieces, and that's one of them. You know, continuing to support archaeology is going to be important, but again, it's not just about archaeology and anthropology and paleontology. It's about all the other sciences combined. So, I'm rambling. Other questions? So, let me tell you that this started about 6 months ago when I was invited to give a presentation in Venice, and they wanted to hear my take on the history of Venice. And I shared with them what I thought Venice was doing for them, and it resonated well with them. And I have had the same conversation with business groups in Sarasota, Sertoma clubs, and I've presented in Boca Grande. As I say, I'm going up to Cortez, kind of on a mission to help people realize the value of all this heritage that surrounds us in terms of sense of place, what it means to all of us, and what it means to the economy of the area. So I'm calling that a community heritage-based economy. And it's not to replace any other part of the economy, it's to enhance and add to it. So that's why I'm here tonight. That's why I drive from Sarasota to Northport to be with you, to share that vision that I have, because I think it's the same vision that you have. And I'm taking that vision every place I can and sharing it as much as I can. So that's what I'm up to.
Please keep that. This is one, many times for our guests, we give them a Little Salt Spring cap. But tonight, I think this is more appropriate, and
Looks the same to me.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.